The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy. I've been giving a weekly talk, like a 45-minute talk for, almost 15 years now, I think. So sometimes I'm really aware of not recycling too many of my old jokes and stories, but this is one of my favorites. So if you've heard this one before, forgive me. It's actually just an article I read. I think maybe I read the article in Forbes magazine. This is many, many years ago. And it said, if you take your 5 best friends and you average out their income, it's probably your income. And when I read that, I thought about that, and I thought, I need new friends. Really what the article was saying is you resonate with people you spend the most time with. And it's one powerful way to affect change in your life. And tonight's topic is about cultivating effort and resilience, not just in your practice, but in your life. There are so many people who I'm talking to who are saying that this social distancing thing is starting to turn more and more into a grind. And part of the question becomes, how do you stay inspired? How do you keep going when it's hard? Because it is hard. It's hard to stay inspired in life, not just your meditation practice. And it takes a lot to kind of keep going. So what I'd like to talk about is first about the goal of practice, like why exactly are we practicing? And then talk about some of the habits that you can do, keys to kind of sustaining effort in your life, and to talk a little bit about the other side of effort, the other side of the coin, which is actually cultivating your capacity to be, which will be the subject of another talk down the road. But this question of why do we practice, and this question reminded me of a conversation I had with my good Dharma buddy, Luc Sauvé. Luc was one of the early people to get trained in teaching Bikram yoga, which is the hot yoga. 28 postures in a room heated to 110 degrees, and he had just retired from the Mounties and in Canada, and was teaching, I believe, in Ottawa, and he had waiting lists for people to get into his class, which is kind of unusual because there's a fair bit of yoga out there, but wow, people were really busting down the doors to get in there. And I said, Luke, why is this so popular? And he looked at me and said, Bikram buns. Those tight little buns you get from doing really, really intensive yoga. And hey, I don't have an argument with that. I mean, we all want attractive glutei maximi, which, by the way, is the plural of gluteus maximus. Everyone wants to look good. So the question is, why do you practice? Why do you meditate? Why did you tune into this, and why are you listening right now? There are many, many benefits to practice, and I could spend a lot of time just talking about them. But as I like to say, when you look at the research that's being done, if meditation was a drug, it would be considered the miracle drug of this era. If we could package this, it would really be amazing because its effect on your physiology, of how your system moves into the opposite of the fight and flight and moves more into that sense of internal equilibrium. And speaking of physiological equilibrium, this also ties into emotional equilibrium, that when you develop this capacity for self-observation without judgment, stuff happens and you come back. You come back more quickly. You cultivate more mental clarity, its effect on the capacity to see clearly and to sustain focus and concentration. Very, very powerful. It affects your intuition, your capacity to sense kind of what's over the horizon through this mind-body intuitive functionality. It's kind of like this tide that floats all boats. Everything receives benefit from practice. I always love that line from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of Transcendental Meditation. He said, "You water the root and enjoy the fruit." And as cliche as that is, it's absolutely true. So there are changes that occur when you become more resilient, when you become more awake, when you have more energy, when you're more responsive rather than reactive, when fear is running you a little bit less than before. The changes that occur, unfortunately, can also kind of feed your ego. It's great article in a magazine for CEOs that talked about get the mindful edge on your competition. Sports teams use meditation, and part of it is because you become more aware, more alive, better reaction time, so you can compete better. So there are tangible benefits to this practice that can change your life, but there are also tangible benefits that create inner freedom, that can increase your capacity for true happiness. That's happiness independent of externals. Oh, I just touched my face. It's not think happy thoughts and you'll be fine kind of practice. This is a reality-based practice. It's based on the laws of nature. I've always loved the line that really what it comes down to is practicing wholehearted cooperation with reality. Practicing wholehearted cooperation with reality, which means, so what is real? What is real? And when you look at the teachings that underpin this practice that we do, they talk about liberation. They talk about freedom through the Four Noble Truths. That stress and suffering are part of the human experience. That suffering always comes from some kind of clinging, some kind of attachment. And that the whole path is about coming to the end of suffering. So meditation is a science. It really is, in many ways, a science. If you do these practices, these things will happen. But on the other hand, although it's very, very simple, and on the other hand, it's incredibly nuanced, and if you had another hand, if you actually had three hands, it's really, really hard to maintain. And maybe you've noticed this. So what gets in the way of liberation? What gets in the way of freedom and happiness? In the ashram where I live, the root teacher had this line that I thought was very powerful. I come back to it again and again and again. And he said that most people stop practicing precisely because it's working. And what I find quite often that for many people, when you start to meditate, you start to feel better. As the joke goes, you feel better. You feel more alive. You feel more awake. But then you also find you feel your sadness better, your depression better, your anger better. Basically, everything undigested in your life starts to come up to the surface. And so the practice, which begins to open us up to a sense of freedom, starts to reveal to you where you're not free. And then that really opens up a question, a very powerful question. What's in the way of you feeling happy right now? And if you like, let's take a moment. If you like, just close your eyes and just maybe take 3 long and full deep breaths. And when you sense the landscape of your life right now, of what's falling away, what's coming your direction, is there a sense of what's between you and feeling truly happy right now? If you had to name 3 things, what would they be? If you like, you can deepen the breath. If you like, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. Again, when we look back to these underpinning teachings, here's this possibility of liberation, of freedom, of happiness independent on externals. And then when we look at what's between us and that, there are these forces, there are these energies that get in the way. And one sort of delineation of these energies is three things. The first one is greed. It's wanting. And what we want, essentially, is we want to be successful. We want more and more pleasure in increasing quantities. We want fame. We want to be loved. We want praise. That's a big, big drive in our lives. That wanting of success, pleasure, fame, and praise. The other energy is, at its extreme, is hatred, but we could just say it's aversion. It's the stuff you avoid. And what we tend to avoid is the opposite of what we want. That is, we want to avoid pain. We want to avoid the pain of shame. We want to avoid failure. And we want to avoid being blamed. The third energy, or the third force that gets in the way, is described as delusion. And it's sort of like chasing after the wrong thing. It's believing in your heart things that really aren't true. Or it's believing in your heart, or not believing in your heart, things that actually are true. These fundamental forces of being hijacked by desire, and being hijacked by aversion, and being hijacked by believing things that aren't true, they kind of mess things up. Because if we're not aware of these forces and how they're operative in our internal operating system, we're going to build a life based on greed, hatred, and delusion. A life run by desires, a life run by fear, and a life informed by confusion. And I really believe that for each of us at some point, we just say, I'm touching my face again, we say, stop. Just stop. What do I really, really want? What's really most important in my life? And out of all this stuff going on in my life, what is actually true? Those moments, which can really feel like a crisis, are really, really powerful times in our lives when you need to set off for your proverbial 40 days and nights in the desert. What do you really, really want? And what is true? One of the most interesting conversations I had was in a bar in West Africa. And I was talking with this kind of older, like my age now, guy, kind of weather-beaten, and as we were talking about his world travels and all of his exploits, he had lived a very, very full life, you could tell. And we were talking about meditation. And then I just remember so clearly, over his bière Niger, of said, man, I've done it all. I've had all kinds of relationships. I've had all kinds of adventures. I've had all kinds of drugs. I've done all kinds of things. And even when I think this is it, there's something in the back of my head that's saying, this isn't it. This isn't what you're really looking for. In my young idealistic brain, that was a real powerful experience for me. Because I could sense the sadness, the searching that was still going on for him. And it really points toward really one of my favorite mantras, and that is, keep going. When you're feeling stuck, when you're feeling deflated, keep going. When you think you've arrived, when you think you're fully awake, you definitely want to keep going. There's a great story that a really wonderful non-dual teacher talks about, where he did years of a very, very intense concentration practice. And concentration practice it requires a lot of resilience because you have your anchor, whatever your anchor may be, and you just keep training your attention on it. And it can be tremendously powerful, tremendously freeing, but it takes a tremendous amount of energy and resilience. And part of his practice also included reflecting on koans. And koans are questions that are designed to take you kind of beyond the mind. So you're sort of like blowing the mind by going through the mind. What was your face before your parents were born? And that becomes your anchor, really, reflecting on that. What is other? What is the sound of one hand clapping is kind of the classic. So he was given a koan, and after days of contemplating and working this question, he went back to his teacher and he said, I'm not sure you gave me the right question. Shouldn't the question be, who is it that's asking the question? Apparently the teacher got a really, really big smile. Because through that sustained concentration and kind of burning through the challenges of it, there was a huge shift in his consciousness, which pointed back toward awareness itself. And chances are that some of the most satisfying experiences that you've had in life have probably come out of great sacrifice. Working toward a degree and then getting the degree. Sticking it out in a really tough relationship and then having a breakthrough where suddenly you see the other person's point of view and they see yours and you have that elation of connection again. Or times when you wanted to really, really get in good shape and you really worked at it and you stayed at it and then suddenly you're feeling great and you're looking great. Taking out a project, really focusing on that project and completing it. The satisfaction comes from sustaining resilience. And it really comes from, I think the best word that I love is grit. Or resolve, resilience, the stick-to-itiveness. There are all kinds of studies on this. There's studies at Harvard, at West Point, and many, many others where they're really looking at what are the factors that go into being successful in life. Is it raw intelligence? Is it cultural background? Is it emotional intelligence? It's grit. It's resilience. You do not have to be the smartest person in the room to be successful. You just need to stay in the room. You need to stay the course. And this becomes something that we apply not only in life, but you apply in your spiritual practice. At age 25, when I stumbled into an ashram, I was amazed. Here were like 100 and some people practicing intensively. And the whole lifestyle was built around spiritual practice. And up until that point, I had to kind of work my practice into my life. Well, here was life built into practice. And I kind of threw myself into it. And it was amazing to be around people we worked very, very hard in jobs, but practice was really in the foreground. We did practices in the morning. We kind of practiced through the day. We had many of our meals in silence. We'd practice in the afternoon. We had practice in the evening. Practice, really, the idea was to kind of sustain practice through the day, to sustain awareness through the day. And you know what the biggest challenge we had? Well, we had lots of challenges, but one of the biggest challenges we had in the community? Trying to keep the practice alive. And maybe you've struggled with this. You take on a practice. Well, it doesn't have to be a meditation practice, but anything you know is good for you. And you find yourself struggling, trying to keep it going, resisting it. I've maybe told this story too many times, but quite often when I wake up in the morning, this is actually a while ago, I would wake up in the morning, my first thought would be, I should do yoga. And then immediately I would think, I hate yoga. The mornings, I noticed when I would sort of make myself do yoga, about 3 minutes in, I would say to myself, God, I love yoga. I should do this every morning. The next day, I hate yoga. What I found was if I committed to doing 7 minutes of yoga, that would kind of be my breakthrough. Committing to 8 minutes seemed like it was too much, but 7, sometimes all I would do would be 7 and I'd be done. But sometimes it would kind of kick me over into the next thing. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what it means to sustain effort. Like, so what are some of the best practices for keeping your energy moving, keeping resilience, keeping that sense of focus? And really the most fundamental thing is to discover what you love, and discover what you enjoy. Like, what's the most important thing? And here again, it's so important to drill into this, because when so much of your life may be informed by greed, hatred, and delusion, it takes time to kind of sift through all the old programming. What do you really, really want to do? What do you love? Now, I know someone who does not love his work, but he's at an age where he knows that it's probably practically the most important thing for him to stay where he is, just for the security. So he's kind of caught in, I'm doing a job I don't love. But as we talked about it, what he does love is his family. He loves being able to provide, to help them feel safe, to create an environment where his kids can really grow and actualize themselves. He loves being able to provide. And so for him, he realized that his work helps him to live fully. And he's managed to convert, while he doesn't love his job, he focuses on how grateful he is to be able to provide for his family. That's how he wires up his sense of loving something that he could tweak. He feels, that could be a slight improvement. But it works for him. And I think sometimes, again, this is a reality-based practice. How can you wire it up so that what you're committed to is connected to a sense of love or to a sense of passion? Which brings into mind Jack London's kind of credo, where he says, I would rather be ashes than dust. I'd rather that my spark should burn out in a brilliant blaze than it should be stifled by dry rot. I would rather be a superb meteor, every atom of me in magnificent glow, than a sleepy and permanent planet. The function is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. When you have it lined up, where you're doing what is most important, it's a little bit easier to sustain attention. It's a little bit easier to tap into resilience. And if you're not, then that suggests that that's some place where you might spend a little more time. Another thing that really supports your practice is, as I mentioned way back in the beginning, is to associate with like-minded people. Back in the Buddha's day, as he was starting all these communities, with very, very young and fresh practitioners, there was lots of conflict. And he sort of made these rules of what you can talk about, what you can't talk about. It's fascinating to see them. But what you could talk about freely was about your practice, about your insights, about your inspiration, about what you're learning. Like that was where you would focus your conversation. And when you are around people who want what you want, who are excited about what you're excited about, that is priceless. It is a priceless commodity. And again, something to consider. If there's something you're wanting, reflect on the people who most want that as well, because you will resonate with them. And you will find support when you're not inspired. And then there's a good chance that when you're inspired, you might be an inspiration for someone else. Another thing that's really, really helpful to kind of sustain effort in your life and in your practice is to have in mind a role model. There's a great line from neuro-linguistic programming that says, look for someone who already has what you want. Do exactly what they do, and you'll have what they have. It might be a little bit simplistic, but maybe not. And so it becomes an interesting question. Who is an inspiration for you? Is there someone living a life that inspires you? That you might love to live that kind of life? And then that can become a very interesting point of study. How do they live? What are their habits? What are their attitudes? And if you were to adopt some of those, how would that inspire you? How might that change your internal wiring? This is actually a very powerful kind of super learning technique. When you're learning anything new, who's the expert? Study them. Sense if you can model them. And you may find it really opens up some really cool ways to really transform yourself. The next thing to consider are the habits that you can start to build into your life. The habits that you know they're not just life affirming, but they're the habits that you know are going to move you toward where you want to go in your life. There's a classic talk, if you haven't heard it, about the power of making your bed. First thing, that when you make your bed, it gives you a sense of accomplishment. You did something, and then every time you look at your bed, it's done, it's clear, and it's one of the first things you learn in the military. You do that, one thing accomplished, now you're moving on to the next thing. Creating rituals can be very, very helpful, and I really kind of like creating rituals as opposed to creating habits. But the things that you do daily that you know are going to help to mobilize and motivate you. I have certainly gone to a default in my never-ending quest for self-improvement of setting outrageously high goals for myself. And I've made some adaptations that will kind of work for me better. It's the difference between I'm going to do an hour of yoga in the morning to I'm going to do 7 minutes of yoga in the morning. When I want to write, it's very easy for me to fall back onto I'm going to write 1,000 words every day, no matter what. That doesn't work for me. But if I change that to I'm going to write something every day, or I'm going to write for at least 10 minutes every day, that little habit, that little ritual sets things in motion. And sometimes that's all I do. Sometimes it really inspires me. So what I've chose to do, and I know I've talked about this before, is to explore the minimum effective dose. What is the minimum amount I can do that's going to have the maximum effect down the road? And so my rituals have really focused on really small things. For a long time, I play the bamboo flute. I decided I'm going to play every day, even if it's one note. And there would be some days where I'd be like in bed, I'd be ready to fall asleep, and I realized I didn't play the flute today. And I would get up and run to my office, play one note, and go back to bed. For a couple of years, I decided I'm going to write one haiku every day. It's just 21 syllables. It doesn't take long. My latest is to write one cartoon a day. I did it last year, sort of my kind of my commitment for the year, and I'm now in my second year. I'm not saying they're good, but I've got about 450 cartoons. A couple of them might be good, but mostly I'm loving the creative process. There's something about the discipline of it that has been very, very helpful for me. Another element when you're looking to sustain focus, and something we all know, which is to really bring exclusive attention. That is to say, to minimize multitasking. It's pretty much proven that multitasking really doesn't work. So is it possible to really focus your attention, to kind of sustain attention? One of the ways that I do this in my own work, and I've talked about this before, but if you're not familiar with the Pomodoro technique, the word Pomodoro is tomato. The guy who started it was a medical student in Italy, and he had a timer in the shape of a tomato, and he would set it for 25 minutes, focus exclusively for 25 minutes, and then take a forced break, and then do that again and do rounds. And that has been such a great go-to technique for me. So I'll put on headphones, I only have one screen open on my computer, and I blast away at it for 25 minutes. And the difference between 25 minutes of focused attention with a forced break, as opposed to 3 minutes of this, 2 minutes of that, 30 seconds of this, it's huge. It's extraordinary. Another element, if you don't have this built in, is to look for ways to build in accountability. It kind of comes back to the power of finding like-minded people, finding community. And that's someone that you're accountable to, someone who's paying attention. And this has been so helpful for me. And through all my years of living in the ashram, and also all my years in the year of living mindfully, to have a couple people where you make a commitment to what you're going to do, and then you're accountable to them. And one of the easiest and best ways to do it is to find one or a couple people, and then decide what you're going to focus on. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And then you send a text or an email. No one is required to respond, but you just say, I did it or I didn't do it. And just knowing there's someone out there, wow, it's huge. It's huge. Which kind of leads to like focusing on where is your discipline? What actually are you going to do? And here, the more specific you can be, the better. What will your practice be? What are you holding yourself accountable to? And one of the most powerful things that I have done, that many, many people have done, is choose one observation and one restraint for 30 days. That is to say, one thing you're going to do and one thing you're not going to do. And then you track it carefully for 30 days and build in some accountability. This has been, I can't tell you how life-altering it's been for me. It inspired me to get completely off coffee, not off caffeine. And many, many people have used this as the restraint, something you're not going to do for 30 days. You know, coffee, some people will say, I'm getting off sugar this month, or I'm going to get off wheat, or I'm going to try not being on animal products for the next 30 days. Or I'm not going to gossip about anyone. I'm not going to talk about anyone unless they're fully present. Or I'm going to really focus on not criticizing myself for 30 days. And that becomes a restraint, a practice of what you're not doing. And inevitably what happens, like for me, when I switched from coffee to matcha tea, I wasn't off caffeine. I really didn't enjoy it for the first 10 days. I really missed it, and I didn't like what I was doing. And then as I'm holding myself accountable, like, wow, my energy isn't spiking the way it used to. I'm actually sleeping a little bit better at night. I actually don't mind the taste as much as I hated it earlier. And then by the end of that 30 days, it was kind of locked in. It was a really, really, really powerful experience for me. And some of the observations I've taken on, the most classic one is like, how long are you going to meditate? every day? What are you going to commit to? For one 30-day period, I just thought, okay, that physical therapy I hate doing, I'm going to do it every day for 30 days. Or I'm going to work out for every day for 30 days. It's really powerful, really, really powerful. What is a practice you could commit to with the intention to cultivate resilience, to really, really stay with it for 30 days? One of the elements that I found really helpful that I always like to suggest is something called the Seinfeld Method, which is Jerry Seinfeld when he was writing. He knew he had to write every day if he was going to move his career forward. So he got a 30-day calendar and he put a red X. I'm touching my face again, but it's really itching. And so you keep the chain going for 30 days. So focusing attention. Awareness is like energy. Awareness is like sunlight. You can focalize it like a magnifying glass, or you can just kind of like stand in the sunshine. Learning how to focus and sustain attention through resilience can absolutely change your life. You can manifest things that are unimaginable. But to do that, it takes will, and it takes effort, and it takes support. It's really, really juicy. But with all that effort, and with all that resilience, and with all that attention, and with all that energy, if it's not aligned with your purpose, with what you really, really want, it's not going to make you happier. It's not so much about nonstop effort as it is about balance. And just in the last few minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about this. I once had a great conversation with this young man who was really working with depression. And the cause of his depression was he'd been training for the Olympic trials in canoeing. He wanted to make the team more than anything ever before. He gave it all of his focus. He dialed in his diet. He was doing these intense workouts. And as the trials were coming up, he stepped up his training, pushing himself every day, every day, every day. And when it came time for the trials, he wasn't at his peak because he had overtrained. He didn't have the recovery for his muscles to rebuild. So when those trials came, he was flat. He just didn't have it in him. And a huge amount of regret in his life for that. And it really points towards something that is so, so critical in our practice, which is balance. When you're training for the Olympics, or when you're training for anything, it becomes the balance of full and sustained and wise effort where you're exhausting yourself and you're building new muscle, you're building new skills, and full and complete recovery. Really, really hard to find the balance between the two. When do you give it all you've got, and when do you stop? When do you pause and allow yourself to completely and fully recover? And it's interesting, if you think about the times of your day, the natural times of your day, there are probably times when you are primed to give it all you got. And then times when the wise thing is to stop efforting and take more time for recovery. Knowing your energy patterns is super, super helpful. When you're at peak, when you're in the valley, and when you need the recovery. This has been so helpful for me to recognize for myself, when is peak for me? And for me, it's the morning. I do my best to wake up and just get everything aligned for maximum productivity. It's like getting enough sleep. It's drink a liter of water, do some movement, sit, journaling. That's when I do my cartoon. I choose 3 things I'm going to get done. I pick out the hardest one, apply the caffeine, and I get going. The valley is, for me, the afternoon. It's when it's administrative stuff. It's emails, calls, and meetings. Or I alternate between doing chores where I'm moving and going back to the administrative stuff. And late afternoon is the recovery, and the evening, when I'm pretty much worthless. That's just reading. Maybe it's going for a walk. Sometimes I have a second wind, but mostly I'm finding it's very, very wise to really explore the unwinding process so I can move into full recovery and be ready for the next day. So I think this is part of the balance in life of really knowing the self and knowing first, what do you want? What will support you in moving forward? And really understanding that there's tremendous joy in applied effort. And there can be such great satisfaction through sustaining attention on what you want. You can really enjoy that sense of accomplishment. But also recognizing it's about balance. Getting what you want can be really, really powerful. But learning how to let things be can also be really powerful. And we'll be talking about that in another talk. So I'd like to close with a short little reflection, a very short one, and a short reading from Mary Oliver. So as you're ready, you can close your eyes. You might take 3 slow, full, deep breaths. And you might just sense about your capacity to do, your capacity to manifest things. And you might just sense, where is the balance point for you between wise effort and wise recovery? Sensing the importance of knowing what's most important and taking joy at effort and finding all the ways you can inspire yourself to move toward what you want. And the wisdom of knowing when it's time to let go and let be. And reflecting on these words from Mary Oliver. This is her poem, Song of the Builders. On a summer morning, I sat down on a hillside to think about God, a worthy pastime. Near me, I saw a single cricket. It was moving the grains of the hillside, this way and that way. How great was its energy! How humble its effort! Let us hope it will always be like this, each of us going on in our inexplicable ways, building the universe. As you're ready, you can deepen the breath. As you're ready, you can open your eyes if they're not already. Thank you so much for your time and attention. My deepest hope is that you know what you want, that you find ways to stay inspired, to tap into the passion that comes with resilience, and also knowing the wisdom of all the skillful means to balance out effort with recovery and with letting be. So may you and your grit have a wonderful, wonderful evening and beyond. And thank you again for your time and attention. I look forward to being with you again.